It's time for Paleo Radio, only on Secular Media Network.
You are now entering Paleo Radio.
Welcome to Paleo Radio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jeremiah Bannister.
And I'm Joe Elder.
And this is Paleo Radio. We are so excited to be back. This is our very first episode of the new year. Big hooray.
Yeah, going to be writing the date wrong for another 2 months. It's exciting.
I know. It's 2016 now. We're in the early part of January. We're really glad that you joined us. We have a totally amazing show, don't we, Joe?
Oh, yeah. Great lineup. We're going to start off with, Can the Constitution Govern America's Sprawling Empire? That's going to be a decent article.
Then we're going to talk about whether or not Americans are losing faith in democracy.
After that, there's a FOIA request showing that the government lied about the lead in the water in Flint, Michigan, so we're going to continue with that story.
Royally offensive, Joe.
Oh, man.
Infuriating.
Terrible, terrible humans.
We're going to get to that, but we're going to wrap up the entire show talking about an article by Douglas Kinchy. He's over with Kaufman Interfaith Institute. It's talking about difficult texts and how we should best understand them.
Yeah, that's a real clever way of saying he's kind of wading through BS.
It's your opinion.
To me.
We're gonna play good though. I mean, this is in my opinion, it's interfaith atheism. I think that we're going to be talking about some heavy stuff.
Yeah, constructive criticism, you can call it in some ways.
But we're going to start out here in this program. We're talking about an article called "Can the Constitution Govern America's Sprawling Empire?" The U.S. Supreme Court struggles to stretch a constitution written for 13 coastal states to encompass non-contiguous states, dependent nations, insular areas, and a commonwealth. This is by Garrett Epps. And by the way, Garrett Epps, just so that everybody knows ahead of time, and this warrants it, he teaches constitutional law and creative writing for law students at the University of Baltimore, and it's over at the Atlantic.
Yeah, but what would that help with what he knows?
I don't know.
What does that mean?
Qualifications.
Oh, man.
So he begins by saying, and kind of laying it out, that he believes that we live in what academics might call a post-colonial phase. And he's saying it's not about the heartland anymore. And I didn't even have to hardly get beyond that, and I was like, dude, there's some truth
I'm with that.
I'm with that.
I can dig.
Yeah, look at how presidential elections have run. And he did this in the beginning. He says, folks like Jimmy Carter, okay, that's definitely a heartland guy. For sure.
Sure.
You've got Ronald Reagan, which, where he was born, not so much where he governed or where he did anything else, but where he was born and raised and kind of the idea of where he came from. Bill Clinton, all these guys, heartland guys. And then he says, then go and think about it. He says, go and look at Barack Obama, right? Half Indonesian, born in Hawaii. You've got Ted Cruz, who's running right now, Canadian. You got John McCain, Panama Canal Zone.
Yeah. Oh, OPC.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right.
Didn't know about that. He was sleeping on everybody. Yeah, John McCain, born in Panama.
And then you look at the Supreme Court. I mean, this is, I don't know how far back it goes that this has been the precedent, but these are metropolitan people, right?
Yes.
Mostly East Coast people, right? But he says that you've got this mismatch between constitutional theory and national reality, and that this thing began really early. Wasn't surprised at all.
Yeah, well, I think it began as early as Madison and Jefferson, where Madison would say, hey, I think you can adjust the Constitution. I think you can change it. And Jefferson says, no, it's a staunch set of rules. It was a fundamental change from the beginning.
Well, and that Thomas Jefferson, he's actually mentioned, I'll quote it at length because all of this is worth hearing. And listen, I even encourage people, once it's all done, go back and listen again and listen to everything that was said specifically here. But he says this, Thomas Jefferson believed that the Constitution did not permit the nation to acquire new territory. Faced with the chance to buy Louisiana, however, he bit his tongue. Since then, the Constitution's language hasn't changed, but years of conquest, purchase, and outright theft have given the nation two states, Alaska and Hawaii, physically separated and culturally distinct from the lower 48. Hundreds of Indian reservations, rancherias, pueblos, and native villages, which are separated dependent nations incorporated through treaties, a self-governing commonwealth called Puerto Rico, and more than a dozen other insular areas such as American Samoa, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah, so it's gotten a lot more diverse, hasn't it?
That was hard to read.
Yeah, it's quite a list.
That's what I'm saying. I was literally running out of breath.
But it shows that the laws and what we're trying to govern ourselves with, it could be argued by some that it's stretching far beyond what we ever thought it was supposed to govern, right? I mean,
yeah.
With a basic idea of when these ideas came to pass, they weren't even sure if the West was even, we weren't even sure if you could live out West before they had written half these rules.
And then they figured out that, we can, and there's an ocean over here, and there's some other islands that we can go over and check out.
Yeah. And it does create a state of dependency in most of those cases. Look at Puerto Rico right now. I think they're filing in debt again. They can't pay out their debt to the last loan.
They're totally hosed, and they're actually going to be. We're going to mention them pretty soon because they're one of the cases that are coming up with the Supreme Court now.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, so you've got the most news coverage. Back to the article. The most news coverage concentrates on the big metropolitan cases. Religious freedom, for example, labor unions, abortion, the Affordable Care Act. The outposts of empire have a place on this year's docket. And there were things in this, Joe, I didn't even know about.
Oh,
honestly, it's way outside my radar here.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that came from left field in terms of my political atmosphere, too. I wasn't expecting I wasn't expecting most of this stuff. Particularly what was going on with Native Americans, I didn't even know.
Yeah, I had no idea. And it's like, that has to say something.
Sure.
In the article, I'm glad that he said that. I'm glad the writer said that to say, it's not a popular topic. What's going on with American Samoa? Right? What's going on with Guam? What's happening with that? I mean, that's not really in the headlines very often.
Better go up to Alaska, see what's going on up there.
Yeah. Right. I mean, be realistic. One of the only times Alaska is ever in the news is with Sarah Palin.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to be rude.
They're talking about the salmon running bears or something, too, if you're a nature person.
If you're a nature person, right? Yeah. But in political news, you're not going to see that hardly ever.
No.
Same thing with Hawaii. How often do you see stuff from Hawaii on the front page?
Not very often, except for they're not letting them build a telescope. That's going to be another story for another time.
Right.
But that's a national story.
So you've got... You've got all of these different trials that are going on. The first one that he mentioned, Sturgeon v. Frost, and I don't want to say every single one. I mean, literally, I encourage you to go read the article. It's a great article, and it's loaded with information. But Sturgeon v. Frost, that idea challenges federal management of the vast majority of the state's land. I believe that's in Alaska.
Yeah,
I'm hoping that I've got this right. Right?
Yep.
That it's in Alaska. But another one, the Dollar General Corporation v. Mississippi. Another one is the Dollar General Corporation v. Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, and in that, the court must decide whether Indian tribal courts can hear lawsuits against corporations for torts they allegedly commit on the reservation.
If they are sovereign nations, then should this even go to court?
That's the whole thing.
They would be able to.
That's
it
the whole
shouldn't even be argued.
Right.
Shouldn't even be argued.
Yeah, can we do that? And that, I think, is at so much at the heart of so much of this.
Yeah.
Right? That we're just simply in areas, maybe, are we even supposed to do that at all? Is that a violation of something? Like, that you're even over there in those lands dealing and making decisions on these topics when there's a sovereign people over there? It seems like that's at the heart of so many of these.
Yeah. And I think Garrett Epps, I mean, that's what he's talking about with a sprawling empire. What makes the United States think if we've signed a treaty or we've made an agreement that people have sovereignty over their land and they get to make their own rules and decisions, they have their own courts, that if there's an offense committed on that property that the United States has a say? Why?
Yeah, why?
According to the treaty or the documents that we've signed, why?
And seriously, how much of that idea that it's our responsibility, how much of that idea is just permeated through our entire policy-making apparatus?
Oh, big time.
We should deal with this. It's like, well, maybe you shouldn't. Right? There are some things maybe you just shouldn't deal with, to be quite honest. I mean, goodness gracious.
We have problems with arguing about, policing the world, let alone policing our own backyard. That's a given that the United States is going to have their hand in those pots. But, I mean, we're having a hard time rolling back people being 12,000 miles away with guns and weapons taking things.
And listen, I mean, it's being overseas and the space between them. But even things like, let's say, for example, the distance between Washington, D.C. and certain Indian reservations.
Yeah.
That are that these places are totally being hosed. And it's like, why can't you just mind your own freaking business sometimes?
Yeah. Well, I think when you have a sprawling empire, it's hard to do that. The only thing that you understand is power and wielding it, pretty much.
You've got United States. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
You've got United States v. Bryant, and it says this: in 2011, Michael Bryant, an enrolled member of the Northern Cheyenne Tribe of southeastern Montana, was indicted in federal court on 2 counts of domestic assault and also charged as a habitual offender. The habitual offender status, which can raise the sentence to as much as 10 years in prison, derived from multiple prior misdemeanor domestic violence convictions in Northern Cheyenne Tribal Court. If those cases had been heard in state or federal court, Bryant would have been entitled to appointed counsel. But the Sixth Amendment doesn't apply to tribal courts, and the Indian Civil Rights Act does not require tribes to supply counsel for offenses that carry less than a year in jail. Bryant is challenging the indictment on Sixth Amendment grounds.
Well, that's a unique situation to be brought into. So the evidence they use is from the Cheyenne tribal courts, but they're not going. But at the same time, they're going to try him outside of the court system that they know he would be in.
Right.
It's really interesting.
And it does make it hard. They were saying that it makes it hard for them because this is a way that they're cracking down on violence, and they're saying that the reason why is because it's endemic at this point.
Oh, that's interesting. I honestly can't believe this has flown entirely under the radar, that we haven't heard anything about this. They're talking about massive violence in Indian reservations.
Oh, that's been around for a while.
Yeah.
Same thing with suicide rates. But honestly, listen, I knew just nothing about what was going on with Native Americans before I went to college. And in college, we had a class that was about ethics, and it was about race, and it was about gender issues and privilege issues and stuff. And we had to take different positions depending on what we were assigned. And so I learned a lot about Native Americans during that time. Limited amount. I'm not some genius on the topic.
Sure.
But honestly, I encourage people to just go back and read the article. It's brilliant. Can the Constitution govern America's sprawling empire? And it's written by Garrett Epps over at theatlantic.com.
Yeah, Epps writes, the American Constitution was written for a coastal republic of 13 states and ran into trouble soon after. It now governs awkwardly in empire. The metropolitan figures in the court can decide issues for imperial subjects without much knowledge or even concern over what their decisions do in life on the periphery. I think it makes a lot of sense. We need to rethink the whole thing, possibly. This is Paleo Radio.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
We want to give a quick shout out to those listening on WPRR 95.3 FM 1680 AM here in Grand Rapids, and also 88.3 FM WPJC in Pontiac, Illinois.
As well as to all those people listening on podcasts. And speaking of one of those listeners, Susanna Black, she's affiliated. I need to know more about this, but she's affiliated in a way with the American Conservative, and she tweeted something at me this week and mentioned me and everything, and she referenced this article. She linked it up. So the article that we're going to talk about was sent by someone who also happens to enjoy the program.
Yeah, big tip to her.
Fantastic.
And the article is, Are Americans Losing Faith in Democracy? This was updated by Roberto Foya and Yashka Munk on December 18th of actually last year. Yeah, correction already. A lot of Americans are viscerally angry at the political system. They hate Washington, they don't trust politicians, and they are increasingly willing to vote for populist outsiders, like Donald Trump. But we usually assume that for all their disgust in the political reality, they remain loyal to the ideal of democracy as previous generations of Americans. According to recent polling data, that is simply not the case. In our research, we have found that citizens give less and less importance to living in a democracy. They have increasingly negative views about the key democratic institutions. Most worryingly of all, they are more and more open to illiberal alternatives. Americans aren't just souring on particular institutions or particular politicians. To a surprising degree, they have begun to sour on liberal democracy itself.
Yeah, well, they have 7 points that we're going to try to cover. I don't even know if we're going to be able to do this,
We'll
Joe.
fly through them. Let's try it. Let's make a grand attempt,
Yeah,
shall we?
we're going to try it here. And if you'd like anything to add, if you'd add anything to what we're saying or thinking, you can always send it to paleoradioshow@gmail.com. The first point here was Americans trust their political institutions less, and not just healthy skepticism, but outright disgust.
Yeah, it is. Voters have always feared that their political leaders might be in for themselves, which obviously we assume this to be true. But over the past decades, the mood has turned from a healthy skepticism to outright distrust. Confidence in the U.S. Congress has fallen precipitously.
Yeah. Yeah, and not just Congress, but they mentioned the Supreme Court. The executive branch doesn't matter. I mean, you look at it and you say, just grab, reach your hand in a bag blindfolded and try to grab something and say, hey, this is a democratic institution. Do you like it? You're probably going to have a lot of no's.
Oh, man, at least half, fair to say, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very large and significant number of people who just simply don't believe that you can trust the government to do what's right. In fact, it said fewer than 1 in 5 Americans now believe that you can trust government in Washington to do what's right.
Less than 20%.
Less than 20%.
Oof.
Less than 20 out of 100 can even just say, hey, I trust Washington to try to do what's right.
Man.
They just they don't buy it anymore.
If that isn't enough, the second topic that they run onto is young Americans are giving up on politics. This is from a World Values Survey in 2011. As Americans have ceased to trust in politicians and political institutions, they are also losing hope that they might actually accomplish something by taking part in politics. They have opted out of the political system, and in many cases have stopped taking any interest in politics at all. While a clear majority of older Americans say they have quite a lot of interest in politics, for example, most millennials openly admit that they have tuned out, but those people aren't relying on Medicaid and Social Security.
Right. I think that changes with age. I mean, I think that's an older thing. But
Absolutely.
I gotta say this. Broetheus over on Twitter, the one that Susanna Black was tweeting about Paleocracy to, he said something, and I don't know if it's FOA or Munk or who it is that worked or currently works for the World Value Survey, but it was something that was brought up, and so I said, hey. And World Value Survey liked it and retweeted it. So
hey, there you go.
So, hey, they weren't opposed to what he said about who works for them in the article. So, but yeah, the young people stopped entirely talking about politics, is what it said. But it's so weird. I mean, it's so different from what you experience in day-to-day, at least what I experience day-to-day. I mean, when I go online, I guess there's a lot of people in their 20s and 30s and 40s that I follow or that I'm friends with, but I guess I've always kind of been under the impression that the young people today are interested in politics.
I would bet people under 25 don't care too much. They're the people that are. They may be tuning in right now to watch Donald Trump in a debate they've never watched a Republican debate before in the RNC. I'm sure there's a lot of people that did that, but in the end game, I don't think those are people that are going to come out. Same thing with a lot of people that are loving Bernie Sanders too. First thing he said, hey, this old dude that I've never heard of is talking about free college for everybody if you vote for him. He's got my vote. What do you guys think? Yeah. But none of them even register.
And hey, this kind of different subject for a different day, but this kind of would make it difficult for the idea that millennials will be the ones to save the day.
No, I think they will, and it's kind of a growing bud. I think most people around their early 30s to mid-30s start looking around and going, man, this isn't nearly as organized and as thought out as I thought it was. Right. Maybe this is a little bit incorrect. I think people kind of start realizing that there's more to it by that age.
Number 3, most millennials don't think it's essential to live in a democracy.
That's amazing.
I know. Political scientists have long known that government legitimacy or the popularity of particular administrations is going down. But many of them have argued that regime legitimacy or citizens' attachment to democracy as a political system is as strong as ever. Our research shows that this is just not true. And I guess you goes through, and if we had time, I encourage people to go check it out. There's a graph in there that talks about Americans born in the 1930s and then all the way up born since the 1980s, and visibly it's pretty extreme.
Yeah.
The difference.
Do you think that may be, and I know I'm not trying to paint the most broad brush I can, but I'll throw it out there. Is this because people don't have civics class anymore? And they don't really understand. I'm being as honest and forthright as I can be about asking it this way, but is it because people simply don't understand why it's important to have that? Or whether you think your vote counts or not, why it's at least important to have a democratic system? And the facade that government's paying attention to you, that's worth something.
I think it's also, and I mean, people might get mad at me for saying this, but I think it's kind of like, it's a spoiled thing. I think you can only smack the face of democracy if democracy has you sitting on its lap. I mean, it's kind of that thing here. Like, there's a lot of privileges that come along with the fact that we live in a democracy. Is it messy? Absolutely. Is it grotesquely messy sometimes? Totally, 100%. But the idea of alternatives, and we've talked about this before, but the idea of authoritarian military stuff, I mean, people just don't know. They don't realize how much of what they're doing, even as discontents, right, is provided for by safeguards that are in place because of the model of political economy that the nation that they live in embraces. Like, it's just, that's a fact.
Number 4, a growing number of Americans think democracy is a bad way to run a country. Young Americans have been losing faith in democracy. And again, this is at Vox.com, guys. Go check this out. Really, really interesting articles. Again, World Value Survey between 1995 and 2011. It isn't just the number of people who think it's very important to live in a democracy that's going down. The number of people who think that having a democracy or a democratic system is bad or very bad as a way to run America is going up. This trend is especially clear young Americans. So people are saying it's a democracy is the wrong way to run the country.
I'd just like to know what people think if they say, for example, and maybe this is just this may be a bigger deal than I originally thought, but if you say, we currently live in a democracy, and if people say yes, then I think that they're wrong.
Yes.
Like, I believe that, what was was it Princeton? Mm-hmm. What university did the study and said it's more like an oligarchy? Yeah, I mean, there's real data that's out there that people can go look and say, how would a democracy function? How did our democracy function? Mm-hmm. Has it always functioned just like this? And how would you describe it now? But I think if people look at the current system as democracy, and they say that is what it is, then I can imagine why people would be furious about it. But
you know that it's not democracy when someone can win the popular vote and not win the presidency. I mean, and we've seen that before.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that plays into it in a major way.
Number 5, more Americans want the Pentagon to take over. One of the most striking shifts we have seen concerns the number of Americans. I just said it. I mean, yeah, they would think it to be a very good thing to have the Army rule. Okay, wow.
Holy wow, man.
20 years ago, when the World Values Survey first asked the question, 1 in 15 Americans agreed with the sentiment. Today it's 1 in 6.
1 in 15? You'd think 1 in 15 would be kind of a little screwbally, but 1 in 6 is
1 in
terrifying.
6 is alarming.
So it shows that there's way more Ammon Bundys around than we think, and Clivens.
Oh yeah, there's way more.
They've
got a base of people. Yes.
They need them
real.
to send snacks because they were going to stay there forever but just didn't plan it out. Number 6, support for illiberal alternatives to democracy is growing especially fast among wealthy Americans. Well, la-di-da. Rich Americans are increasingly for authoritarian rule. Well, that's not a big surprise.
Especially in an oligarchy.
Right. For decades, poorer and less educated Americans were more likely to oppose democracy. This, too, is starting to change. As inequality is rising and the wealthy have more to lose from economic policies that would favor the bulk of the population, they are growing increasingly impatient with democratic institutions. The number of wealthy Americans who want a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with Congress or elections, for example, has sharply increased since 1995. While opposition to democracy used to be confined to people who felt marginalized and had little influence, it is now spreading even among the economic elite.
Yeah.
Well, and
yeah.
Not a big surprise.
I don't think it is a big surprise at all. And actually, especially when you look at the nature of what our political system is now and just how undemocratic it just so happens to be.
And I a lot of times get force-fed this idea that Democrats are way better than Republicans from a lot of my friends. But you know what? Democrats have played this game too. They've done this with Obama when they said they were frustrated with Congress, and Congress and the Senate were obviously dragging their feet on purpose, but people said, let's just go around them. Let's use executive rule. This is calling for authoritarian rule in this way. They're saying we're just going to give the president more executive power.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of
You've been listening
Congress and
to
the executive and
Paleo
everything, the
Radio,
differences between them and
exclusively
how
with
slow things down.
Secular
It's called
Media
checks and
Group.
balances. It's really important.
It's not a bad thing.
Number 7, public opinion is shifting away from democracy in many countries around the globe. Americans sometimes explain the troubles of democracy by pointing to features that are special to the United States, like the difficulty of passing legislation. But our findings suggest we need to look beyond America's borders to understand America's troubles. If citizens around the globe are dissatisfied with democracy, the reason for growing anger at the system is likely to be global as well.
Absolutely. And can it be argued that it's because the democracies that have been set up haven't been very good at actually representing and allowing those votes to count? I mean, I know this is kind of the call of saying, like, it's no true democracy, but in a way, has it been? Can we think of a democracy where someone's vote actually counted for what they said it counts for?
All right, everybody, we'll be back in just a couple moments. Our third topic we're talking about is about Michigan and lead poisoning. Don't go anywhere.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
We got a new Spreaker follower, Joe.
Oh, did we?
Yeah.
Who's this?
Fantastic person. It's Miss Behaven over at Promoting Secular Feminism. And actually, we gave it an old listen, didn't we?
Yeah, really good show. Awesome show.
Yeah, fantastic. It's funny, sounds good. Why not just go over and check it out? You can find that on Spreaker at Promoting Secular Feminism.
And we also want to thank one of our latest Twitter followers, Tomoko Rempel, who is a mother, a humanist, and continually learning.
Tomoko Rempel, thank you very much for joining the group.
Thank you.
It's a whole bunch of fun being part of the old family here. So right here, we're going to talk real quickly. This is, once again, Joe, it's close to home.
We got to go back to this garbage.
It's infuriating.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm glad that this stuff is going on. Listen, the FOIA requests have happened. FOIA request shows government lied about lead in water, knowingly poisoning countless children. This is by Andrew Emmett over at the Free Thought Project. Instead of keeping children safe from toxic chemicals, Michigan officials repeatedly lied about the safety of their drinking water.
And to be noted, a lot of people will always put in their headline something that's really catchy and really over the top to try to scare you into it, or just say, hey, man, this will get you the clicks. But in reality, this is the absolute truth. It's devastating what's going on in Flint right now.
Knowingly poisoning countless children. Yep. And once again, let me say, and we criticize, how often do we criticize? All the time. Sensationalistic clickbait headlines.
Oh, yeah.
All the time. Oh, that's real clickbaity. That's ridiculous. This one, not clickbaity at all.
This is click big fishy.
Yeah, you need to seriously go and read it. It's over at Alternet, which is kind of the queen of clickbaits. I mean, it's kind of the...
Fair enough.
Yeah, alternet.org, but they've got some great stuff over there. After filing a FOIA request, a Virginia Tech professor recently discovered Michigan state officials knew the city of Flint's water supply was giving children lead poisoning while falsely assuring residents that the water was safe. Although the government had been aware...
Damn, man.
Although the government had been aware of the increased levels of lead poisoning since July, they continued to lie to the public until a Flint pediatrician published a study in September that found lead exposure in children had doubled citywide and nearly tripled in high-risk areas.
Tripled in high-risk areas.
Think about that.
Wow.
And that it took a Virginia Tech professor. Right? Go science.
Yeah, thanks, science.
Thank you, science, for dealing with this. But this stuff had doubled in some areas, tripled in some areas, Joe.
Yeah.
That's an alarming statistic.
Well, it shows that something's absolutely up. That doesn't happen by coincidence by any means.
Right, and that a Flint pediatrician, I am so happy about this. Like, these are heroes, by the way, and we haven't even gotten into all the details. And let me just give you, I guess it's a spoiler, these people are heroes, right here. Right after switching from Detroit's water supply to the Flint River in April of 2014, people could tell that their water was bad. I mean, it was gross.
It's visually bad. It stank.
And the article says it was cloudy.
It was stanky dirt water from the Flint River which has like 3-eyed frogs that crawl out of the damn
It's
thing.
perfectly fine. No problem at all. Drink it
No,
up.
I mean, seriously, it's old school. Like, it makes me think of a bad guy dumping like green sludge into the river in a cartoon, and then having people down the road drinking it or down the hill drinking it for real.
Yeah, so the water was tested, right, going back to August 14th of 2014. It was tested by the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, the MDEQ. And you know what they found? When they tested it, it was positive for fecal coliform bacteria. And for those who don't know, that's E. coli.
Yeah, E. coli and poopy doops.
Yeah, you know,
It's crap. Literal crap water.
Yeah. And this is what was coming out of their faucets.
How about a work project for Governor Schneider to start that builds a pipe from the Flint River all the way into the governor's office, and he can drink his water directly from it?
They can just bottle it for him.
We'll bottle it. We'll take
They can
it down
bottle
there.
it and say, here, not only for you, here's for your family. And I'm sorry to sound crass.
Down
in
the
saying that,
hatch.
but down the hatch. And you know what? Not only that, how about you swim in it? How about you bathe in it?
Shower in it.
How about you
wash
shower
your hair in it?
Wash your dishes
your
in
teeth.
it. Brush your teeth in it. Use it to wash out your eyes. Do whatever.
Dude.
All of the things that people do
Use it to wash out cuts.
to
and
wash
scrapes.
out cuts. Yeah.
This is just crazy. I'm on healthline.com right now just to talk about lead poisoning, specifically with kids. When it's talking about what it does to children, I just have to mention it. It says symptoms of lead poisoning are varied. They may affect many parts of the body. Most of the time, lead poisoning builds up slowly. It follows repeated exposure to small quantities of lead, which, you know, that happens when you're drinking it, taking it in different ways. Lead toxicity is rare after single exposure or ingestion of lead, so it has to take multiple times. Signs of repeated lead exposure include abdominal pain, cramps, aggressive behavior, constipation, sleep problems, headaches, irritability, loss of developmental skills in children, loss of appetite, fatigue, high blood pressure, numbness or tingling in the extremities, memory loss, anemia, kidney dysfunction, and for children specifically, because it is a neurological toxin, behavior problems, low IQ, poor grades at school, problems with hearing, learning difficulties, short and long-term, and growth delays.
Yeah. And according to the World Health Organization, the neurological and behavioral effects of lead are believed to be irreversible.
And that doubled and tripled in the city of Flint
Ain't that just a thing?
amongst the children.
Ain't that
And
just
they
a thing?
knowingly did it.
And they knowingly did it. Well, they were aware once it happened. They were aware of it when it happened.
But everybody and their brother in the state of Michigan would know if you said, we're going to reallocate the water coming from Detroit and we're going to have it come through the Flint River instead for Flint. Everybody knew that was dirty water.
They knew it was dirty.
They knew it was dirty,
Right.
bad water that is going to be a problem.
Dude, MDEQ spokesman Brad Werfel, that dude's just got to go. Like, he's got to go to jail. Like, certain people, honestly, certain people need to go to jail over this.
Yeah, we've gotten into this culture seriously. I know this is me talking about how soft all things are now, but it is true. We've gotten to this point where people can just go up to the pulpit or they go up to their stage and they say, I'm really sorry for what I've done, and obviously I've learned, and we've fired a few people in these branches, and that should be that. And there needs to be legal repercussions. I mean, we're talking about affecting the health and lives of people long term. It's irreversible, like you said. These effects are not going to go away. You're not going to take a pill to cure them. It's not even a cure is not in sight. It's not even possible.
Which means they're going to live their entire life with this.
Exactly, and it could get worse.
Right. Crime, poverty, homelessness. I mean, dude, it's part of the whole narrative in history with lead poisoning.
It has reverberating effects.
Yes, huge, long, just dramatic ones. According to a series of memos and emails obtained through a FOIA request, Virginia Tech professor Mark Edwards revealed the director of DHHS and the Office of Governor Rick Snyder both received data between July and September documenting the recent spike in kids suffering from lead poisoning. Here's a quote. It's a little long. After missing warning signs of spiking childhood lead poisoning that occurred a few months after switching to a corrosive river water source in 2014, outside pressure forced officials at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to closely scrutinize their data in July of 2015. They discovered scientifically conclusive evidence of an anomalous increase in childhood lead poisoning in summer of 2014, immediately after the switch in water sources, but stood by silently as Michigan Department of Environmental Quality officials repeatedly and falsely stated that no spike in blood lead levels, BLL, of children had occurred.
So they were saying it didn't happen.
But they knew that it did.
Oh, yeah, it was absolute
They were made
cover-up.
aware. Total cover-up.
It was absolute cover-up. I just have to ask, though, like, what do you really do? Like, what do you do when you have, in the state of Michigan, for people who haven't been keeping up, what do you do in a state where you have someone propose twice for an emergency manager, the whole state votes it down twice, and you still get them?
Yeah.
In Muskegon, in Flint, in Detroit.
It's autocratic.
It's autocratic as hell.
Yeah.
There was no choice. Twice voted down. More than twice it happened.
And if you don't know what emergency financial managers, if you don't know what that is in Michigan, we have another episode where we talked about Detroit.
Sure.
And the plights. We've had a couple actually so far about the plights of Detroit. But I encourage you, please look it up for real. Find out what emergency financial management is, how it operates, and just how bad it makes this situation.
And to be very quick about it, it's essentially an unelected, unaccompanied person who has all the power, and they basically overthrow your democratic officials and make all the choices. The one that did it in Detroit is currently now in Atlantic City working with Governor Chris Christie on rebooting that. And an emergency managers who made the choice to move Detroit's water supply out of Flint and return it to the Flint River.
Yeah, Detroit Mayor Karen Weaver declared a state of emergency. Right, she said that it's going to, what did she say, express concern that the increased levels of lead poisoning in Flint's children will result in, quote, learning disabilities and the need for special education and mental health services and an increase in the juvenile justice system. And juvenile, that's for a period of time until people get older. The people who have lead poisoning but are more functional, I mean, you're going to get to a point where you're going to get older. Mental health facilities. Absolutely. Big time.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And Governor Snyder's also declared a state of emergency. Did you know that? He did it only after the federales have started to probe the Flint water issue. This is out of Detroit Free Press. It's a side note article by Paul Egan. But Governor Rick Snyder has declared a state of emergency for Flint and Genesee County Tuesday as a result of the contaminated drinking water crisis, on the same day that the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed it is indeed investigating the contamination of Flint's drinking water supply.
There you go.
And isn't it ironic?
Right. The whole thing. And, listen, what's been going on in Detroit to the outside world, it bums me out because a lot of times I feel as though the outside kind of looks at Detroit in a way without fully understanding the cultural context within the state of Michigan itself politically. Why it is in many ways having such a difficult time rising back up and establishing itself as a city. And I'm not saying that this is entirely the fault of emergency financial managers.
No.
I think that there's problems beyond these people. I don't believe that it's this magical thing that as soon as it's gone, it's just magic wonderland utopia.
That's like blaming the vultures for the animal dying.
But at the same time, the effect and the impact that emergency financial managers have had on Detroit is literally astounding. And people need to understand the race component of this too, and to find out what percentage of people in the state of Michigan reside in areas where they have no political say and power whatsoever. Their council members are able to open meetings and close meetings.
Yeah. Benton Harbor, Muskegon, Flint, Detroit all had emergency managers. Mm-hmm. All of those areas are predominantly occupied by poor to middle-class people, and those people are predominantly black. In the state of Michigan, it's a crazy number of the amount of people that were African American that were under, and I would call it the rule of emergency managers in Michigan in the last 3 or 4 years.
The autocratic dictatorial rule.
Yeah.
It is.
It's a one-way street with an emergency manager.
Plugged in by a governor.
They're not even voted.
They're not, right, exactly. Not even voted in. This is an appointment from the governor. I encourage you, please, go back and check this out. FOIA request shows government lied about lead in water knowingly poisoning countless children. It's by Andrew Emmett at alternate.org.
We're going to continue to follow this story as it's only developing. Next topic, dealing with difficult text in various faith traditions. It's going to be exciting.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact Paleo Radio Show at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of them, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
Thank you, friends and neighbors and listeners of all likes and kinds, for going on iTunes and catching our show.
It makes me so pumped up I want to liquid dance, Joe.
There you go.
Yeah.
Do the wacky inflatable arm flailing tube man.
We still have to get a video of you doing
We
that
will.
somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, we will.
All right.
And we can put it up on Facebook, maybe. We have ideas, folks.
Yeah, and I want to thank Brad Varner. Brad commented over on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Paleo Radio. It was actually a pretty well-liked meme there, Joe.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, with Hawking totally nailing it. And but Brad shared a link in the comment section about Steven Pinker on reason and how he believes that it's the basis for morality as well.
Yeah, interesting. You guys want to see that? Go to our Facebook page and check it out.
It's always interesting.
The article we're going to be jumping into is Dealing with Difficult Texts in Various Faith Traditions. This is an article by Douglas Kinchy, the director of the Kaufman Interfaith Institute in GVSU in Grand Rapids, Michigan, our own here.
Right, and I got this article over at Grand Rapids Press every single Thursday. I absolutely love it. I think I've said it before. It's probably the main reason I get the paper, and I also like the op-eds there. But on Thursdays, they have an entire section there for religion, and they have a segment there called Interfaith Insights, and Douglas Kinchy, he writes there all the time, and so he wrote this one, totally grabbed my attention. I mean, anytime I see his face, I'm like, oh yeah, there's Douglas. But this time it was the headline. I mean, we talk about difficult texts all the time, Joe.
Oh, yeah, we do. We do it in private conversations, but also it's a bugaboo of many religions, not just Christianity, of having multiple competing theories and trying to sort out which ones are the truth.
So Kinchy begins by asking this: why do religions sometimes go wrong? Or is it that people do evil, often in the name of religion by misuse of its teaching? Former Chief Rabbi of Great Britain, Jonathan Sacks, acknowledges that religion, quote, has shed the blood of human sacrifice in the name of high ideals. People have hated in the name of the God of love, practiced cruelty in the name of the God of compassion, waged war in the name of the God of peace, and killed in the name of the God of life, end quote. There's something going on here. I mean, is it possibly that religions are inherently wrong, or is it inevitably wrong, or is it simply incidentally wrong?
Yeah, well, and I my own opinion on that would be that it's inherently wrong because it's not based on evidence or logic. And so it opens the door to having multiple theories that compete and can be viewed as equal because there's no evidence to disprove one or the other or drive one idea out of the ring. You know, basically, ideas can stay alive and be contradictory and competing forever.
They've practiced cruelty in the name of the God of compassion as long as it's been around, in different ways, in different places, at different times, to different degrees. But the idea that there haven't been people at all times, literally in almost all places, who do things to others, even down to the wrongs of things like privilege.
Before religion was around, there was still this misuse, but I think the difference is that killing in the name of God, or in the name of your God, is an inherent idea built upon thoughts that don't have falsifiability. They cannot be falsified, and that's by design. But I think that it creates multiple problems. I see this as a natural end game to an idea, like there's someone in the sky who has a certain set of rules, and we all get to choose them separately, but they all are valid.
It's hard to keep unverifiables in check for very long.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, so the question, though, what causes religion to go wrong? According to Kinchy, one of the things contributing to when religion goes wrong is the misuse of Scripture.
Kinchy's also saying the God of peace, the God of love, but then he's going to jump into misuse of Scripture because he has to account for all of the times that God smited, killed, destroyed, and desecrated other people in their lives in the book by the Word. So I just find it interesting that there's already a contradictory when you're explaining this God of love, and then now you're going to have to go back into the book and sort through all the messy parts and explain those away.
And unless one embraces this kind of real strange, heterodox idea regarding the Old Testament God was a different one from the New Testament God. I mean, that's a popular belief, but theologically minded people, the God of love that Kinchy would be talking about, and he's a Christian,
sure,
that God of love would have been just as much a God of love when he was saying to commit acts of genocide or child sacrifice. those are hard texts that weren't mentioned, but those are hard texts. And the flood. That would be another one. Killing every man, woman, child. Killing everything. Killing every animal. Everything.
In the water, literally.
Totally. Babies with maybe what would be Down syndrome. Some kind of debilitating disease or a chronic condition. Elderly people. Pregnant women. There's your pro-life thing for you. I mean, those things are real. And he says, quote, "These are passages that, when taken in isolation, can be used to go against the core teaching of the Scripture as well as against the interpretive tradition of the religion."
This is the thing, is I think you can take multiple things many different ways. It doesn't have to be religion or claims, but what separates claims from others is the evidence, and that's something that religion won't go down that path. They won't even come close to it.
And if religion, and I think Kinsey believes this, and if I'm wrong, I hope he corrects me about it, but that maybe, for example, some of these verses, not only in the Bible and the Torah, but the Quran as well, that some of these verses were written during a wartime. You got to understand the historical context of what was happening. It was a big war going on and the like. But the idea that, well, that was for that time and that place. Number one, what does that actually say then about that the use of the religious book? That it can tell you something that not too long later
is irrelevant.
And even while it was happening, that it was totally not just irrelevant, but morally wrong.
Morally wrong. But it's not applicable to today.
Let's say, just hypothetically, that Christians and religious Christian zealots find themselves in a time of war. Is it completely unfathomable then that they could look at that and say, I don't agree with Douglas Kinsey that that's a text that's just meant for maybe another time and another place and another people, but maybe that's something that's like other parts of the Bible that are kind of normative.
Exactly. Not at all. It's not at all out of the wheelhouse. Exactly for what you said. There is no text that's in the Bible that says this is for a certain time and place and not to be applied in other places, and we're only doing it just this once. Promise. Can't do it again after that. There's nothing in the Bible that says that. There's no precursor to before God dropped Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, okay, and then after this, it's never going to happen again. So people can believe that the situation they're in is at any given point in the spectrum. There's a lot of people that think they're going to see Revelation before they die. It's a real group of people.
Oh, yeah.
And they think that they're right at the tail end of the book right now. They think they're living the tail end. I mean, people are all over the spectrum, and rightly so. I know I'm just beating it over the head, but it's important. It's the most important thing about all of this is it's because there's no way to say that one is not as valid as the other. They all hold equal value because there's no way of truth detecting.
Not only that, but they're left, and I guess by consequence of that, they're left in a place where interpretive traditions are kind of a dime a dozen in a way. I mean, I wanted to ask and just say, Mr. Kinsey, is it, when you're talking about a proper interpretation, right, and that it goes against this kind of interpretive tradition of that religion or what that religion has collectively recognized as a core teaching and et cetera, and how that plays out in the interplay between that and how they interpret and apply text, what tradition are you talking about? Is it a literalist interpretation? Is it part of the fundamentalist dispensational tradition? Is it rooted in covenant theology? I mean, what about, for example, the historical critical method? What about the fourfold sense of Scripture? You've got literal, allegorical, moral, and anagogical. Most importantly, who out of everybody can actually say which one of these is right and which one of these represents what is the core teaching and how it ought to be understood through the interpretive mechanisms provided by them?
At this point, it's Douglas Kinsey. But tomorrow it could be me or you, and that's the magic and the distaste for it of it all. Is he's giving us his interpretation of how it goes, but really it all whittles down to everybody having their own truth, which is BS. It's a BS argument. It's not real. There's a real world, and there's real consequences and actions and reactions, and you don't get to play a game where you say, I have my own truths that are separate from yours, but we both live in the same world together. It's just not practical or logical.
And it's not just that it's Kinsey today and somebody else tomorrow, but that it's somebody else today too. I mean, Kinsey's one of many, 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 many Christians across the globe. I mean, and so he's not, when he says, you've got a faith tradition that has kind of settled on something, I'm not entirely sure how far I allow that claim to go.
Well, exactly, because when you're trying to argue something, the beginning of that is defining it. Nobody can have an argument about something that both the people engaged in it don't understand what it is. I think that's where most breakdowns come in communication with religion, because there is not a unified understanding what religion is. We were talking about this last week. We can take a Baptist, a Methodist, a Catholic, a Protestant. We can get everybody, set of Vacantists, put them all in a room together and say, I need one paragraph, 4 sentences that describes all of Christianity. But say, we want it for Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, or something like that. Say, we want 4 sentences that give us all of what Christianity is and encompass it all, and you have 5 years to do it. It's an impossible task.
And I want to know about definitions. I mean, I understand when people say the word love. I say the word love too, but I don't say the word love and then say things like, do not think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I've not come to bring peace but a sword. I haven't said things like, but as for these enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence. And I haven't said anything like slay the idolaters wherever you find them and take them captive and besiege them. I haven't said things like that.
Those are Jesus and Muhammad quotes.
So my sense of love and their sense of love, I don't know. If it was a Venn diagram, there'd be 2 different circles with an intersection, but there would be some differences on what we think love is.
Yeah. And Kinsey says, quote, taken out of context and without interpretation, these can be texts that can be misused to justify violent acts. Well, of course they can be. They're outright asking for them sometimes. And you can't play the game of saying that people will read that and not come to the interpretation of what it is meant to say.
At the end of the article, he's got some pretty decent suggestions, I think, pretty fair. These were originally advanced by Christer Stendahl, the former bishop of Sweden, and there's actually 2 of them, and then Kinsey adds one and kind of reiterates the first point, but I think it's worth mentioning. Number 1, when you're trying to understand another religion, you should ask the adherents of that religion and not its enemies. Number 2, and don't compare your best to their worst. Number 3, the addition, most importantly, get to know persons of other traditions and learn from them.
I think 2 and 3 are very, very good. Number 1, I would argue with, I think to get a real well-rounded and educated opinion, you're going to need to hear from the adherents and the enemies of both the ideas. So talk to the enemies of Christianity and the people that are in support of Christianity, and then you get yourself a nice, well-rounded answer.
Speaking of rounded out and well-educated, Joe, the show is amazing, but it's over.
Yep, 1 hour just flying right on by yet again.
I want to thank everybody for joining us, not only in the podcast community and on AM/FM radio, but also all the people on Twitter and on Facebook.
Yeah, you guys can follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook at Paleo Radio Show. We're always around. We love the social media interaction, so go check us out.
Remember to check us out on iTunes and on Spreaker, and go to paleoradio.secularmediagroup.com.
It's been great, guys. As always, we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Paleo Radio, exclusively with Secular Media Group.